again, I'm sure you've seen this thousands of times. And then all of a sudden, you're at the point where actually many households have come to this point as well, where they need to look at their subscriptions and they realise they're paying for Netflix and Disney and all of their TV channels. And wow, that's more than I was ever paying on Sky. So it's something that can happen to businesses too. And as the business grows and on the face of it becomes more successful, because we tend to correlate the biggest number in the business, i.e. the revenue, as success, as it gets bigger, the opportunities for those paper cuts just grow.
Okay, so this chap stood out to me many, many years ago on social media for a number of reasons. He wore a little bit of Stone Island. He had a passion for trainers, and he followed, similar to me, a fairly disappointing football team. And I've been following his advice for the past 4 or 5 years, and today I've actually pinned him down to have a natter with him. So I'm going to welcome to the Director First podcast, Carl Reeder. Carl, thank you for joining us today.
Chris, absolute pleasure to be here, and I can only wholeheartedly agree with disappointing football team, although I'd wager that Southend United are far more disappointing than Preston.
I was thinking about that when I come down here yesterday, and obviously we was in the quarterfinals of the FA Cup yesterday, so I will concede that point. But
yeah, lofty heights. I think we nearly got there, possibly did actually get to quarter. No, I think we were just before quarterfinals. I'm sure your listeners don't want to hear all about historic football, but 92-93 season, I seem to remember we had a good run.
That's my mastermind subject, is Preston North End.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So what's the most obscure question you can answer?
I think I get I don't know, what do you want to ask? I'm really good with football grounds as well, like lower league football grounds.
But you've not been to Roots Hall?
I've not been to Roots Hall. The closest I've been is Colchester a few years ago.
Yeah, we don't like those.
No. Yeah. It was a long way. Cole, I want to get into this one. Right?
Sure.
When somebody asks you, what do you do? What do you answer them?
Do you know what, Chris? That's the most difficult question in the world for me to answer, because I think it's safe to say that I've got what might be called a portfolio career. But if I give you a little bit of my background, and then that will explain exactly what I do. So I actually left school at the age of 15 and had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. So I started up as a YTS hairdresser. And as you can probably tell, I wasn't cut out for it. Pardon the pun. I was washing old ladies' hairs, sweeping up the floor, all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, went back to school, did my GCSEs, and had to find a real job. And had no idea, in honesty, what I wanted to do. And in truth, I'll let you into a secret. I still don't know what I want to do today. I still wonder what I'll do when I grow up. But I fell into the world of accountancy because I had 2 interviews with accountancy firms and 1 in the army. Now, I had no idea what an accountant was, what they should be doing, so on and so forth. I had no idea of a stereotype of an accountant, had no idea that I would be a square peg in a round hole, but managed to pull through it and, work on all of these manual bits of paper and all of that kind of stuff. So fast forward to where I am today. So I co-own a group of accounting firms alongside my business partner, Ben. I also involved in a couple of other businesses. I speak regularly on stage. That's my real happy place. That's my passion. That's what I love doing. Written a couple of books and serve a few charities.
Do you still feel like an accountant?
Do you know what? No. And I've never felt like an accountant. That's actually a really good question. I've always felt like the black sheep of accountancy. However, the fact that I've been that kind of outcast, that person who's not the stereotypical accountant, I believe has actually helped me build the business.
Can I tell you how you've really helped me without knowing it? So I don't know if you've come across many insolvency people.
Far too many.
Yeah. And generally...
Thankfully, not for myself.
Generally, it's like fairly square old boys that spout the Insolvency Act. You'll get younger bucks coming through with the sharp suits, again, frightening the life out of directors. And I've always been me, like you are. I didn't. This was not my first career path. I really fell into it. Like people from sort of my background don't generally get into insolvency. Sure. And I remember one of the first firms I was working with. It was an issue of how I dressed.
Okay.
People would say to you should you be turning up to meetings and in those trainers, and, like with that jacket on, and then you were the first person that I saw. I'm thinking, wow, well, he does it. Like, have you ever had that type of?
100%. So, if I was to go back to my training days, so back when I started out in accountancy, even though it was at the point where I wasn't actually doing accountancy myself, so I stopped doing the numbers very early on in my life, actually, before I'd qualified. Believe in going out to clients, I felt that there was an image that I needed to portray. I needed to wear the Gives and Hawks suit, and I had the BMW on HP and all of that kind of stuff to try and present myself as 10 years older, as professional, so on and so forth. And I had this epiphany that actually, not only does it not need to be like that, but actually it's more powerful to be authentic to yourself. And it's interesting how that's developed, because nowadays you get professionals of all different shapes and sizes and all different breeds, whether lawyers, architects, whatever, who almost wear a new professional outfit of T-shirt and trainers. However, the reality, as far as I see it, is that it's just the same as the three-piece suit. It's not actually them. They're still not authentic, and they still have a dual persona, their work persona and their home persona. But for me, being authentic throughout what I do is really important. And also, I'm a simple guy. It's so much easier to be one person than two.
And I think you naturally get rid of, if somebody doesn't like you based on what you look like, that's probably not the type of client you want to go for anyway. It just sort of, knocks a few out, so to speak.
Absolutely. And as you know, with professional services, it's all about building rapport, building trust, and ultimately getting people to know, like, and trust you. What I found is that by being myself, being true to who I am, means that I attract like-minded people around me.
Yeah.
Whether that's people I work with, either on a sort of associate colleague basis, or however it is, I attract people that are on a similar vibe. So yeah, you do get rid of those who perhaps would be judgmental, wouldn't be the kind of person that you would naturally gel with. And as we know, business is not B2B or B2C, it's H to H, human to human. You naturally want to work with people who are like you, people that you trust, so on and so forth. So yeah, I've seen that. And to give you a very practical example of it, tattoos and my Essex accent and so on, really good example of how, I wouldn't say it's discrimination, but actually preconceived ideas can cause you a bit of detriment, but also be in your favour. I found that often when I was meeting the old school, the B&I sort, who are in their suits, they've got their badge on and so on, typically they'd look at me as if I was the T-boy. And actually, by disarming people like that, sometimes that's a really powerful thing to do.
You mentioned their shapes and sizes, and I've got to bring this up. You was a different shape when I started to follow.
100%.
What happened?
Oh, so do you want the social media answer or do you want the real answer?
Mate, come on.
Okay, so the social media answer is that I was dieting, I was working out of the gym, etc., etc. However, the reality is, went through some quite painful life events, Crohn's disease, variety of bits and pieces combined. So I would love to give you the magic pill and give anyone listening the advice on how to lose sort of 7 stone or whatever. I wish I knew, because I might need it again at some point.
And how did you? Because I like this, because I'm interested in health as well, and I think, like, for me, sometimes I get so busy. I'm like, I've never got tired, me, and then my body just breaks down.
Yes.
Like you hear somebody who's just sat on a settee all weekend watching football. I'm thinking, how do you do that? I'm always active, body, mind. And then what would happen for me is I would run, and then bang, I'm in bed for a few days.
Yep.
What are the key things that you did, or you stopped doing, or you started to do to get you from? Is it 7 stone you've lost?
Yeah, it's about 7 stone. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are there any key takeaways that you could share with us?
Yeah, sure. So, first things first, the always on cycle, I think, is a curse that all entrepreneurs are born with. I think it's something that's within us. I don't know if it's ADHD or similar, but it's a curse that's within us. And those who embrace entrepreneurship are probably the ones who, in the workplace, would find that they can never switch off anyway. And why would they be devoting that much energy and that much focus on somebody else's business. So I think it's completely natural for people to have that. What I would say is when I look back at, I guess, the process that I used to lose weight, because it did start intentionally. I realised at the age of 42 that if I didn't sort my act out, then actually I would be really lucky to see 84. And I needed to do something. So I started the process of losing weight. It was accelerated by a number of things, as I mentioned. So health issues, medication, etc., etc. What I would say is it's actually very similar to how I treat business. You know, in business, we know that consistency is the cheat code. We know things like what gets measured gets managed, so on and so forth. So to begin with, I was just tracking all of the food I was eating. I was making sure I was doing workouts, took expert advice, and just followed that process.
One of the things, the realizations for me has been, right, you know, like when work's going okay and like it's, I'm going to come to this, you know, do we scale, do we grow,
Yeah.
etc. And then I thought to myself, do you know what? The one thing that could trip you up is your health. Like my dad died at 47, I'm 42, and I've lived a relatively clean life the last few years. But like my cholesterol kept coming back high.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I'm sat there at 17, and I look okay for 17 stone, but like, I can't justify, I can't keep bullshitting myself that that's going to be okay. You know, at some stage, this machine's going to break down, and sort of probably leads me on to something else I wanted to talk about is I'm very much, you mentioned the E-Myth in your book, and I love the E-Myth. It was one of the best books I'd read many, many moons ago, and then pretty much forgot everything about it until I picked up your book and you referenced it. Because I'm very much at the moment, I'm the face of our business, believe it or not, you know. And I've always been stuck in doing. So if I got ill, that would be like our business would be over. What's like your view now on how hard you work and what type of things that you work on?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of good points there. So the first thing I would do is just reaffirm what you've said about health being so important. Actually, health is wealth. You know, that's an old saying, but it's true. Health is wealth. It's the only thing we've got, and our body is the only home that we've truly got. So I had the same realization as you, that actually, if I don't sort my act out, something bad is going to happen pretty quickly. High cholesterol, I was pre-diabetic, all sorts of health issues on statins and so on. Thankfully, and, you know, touch wood, let's just hope that carries on, I've managed to get rid of most of those. But it's not just a business impact, it's a life impact. We've got one shot at this life. So it was an awakening to me that I needed to do something. Now, as I mentioned, it was accelerated, but I needed to do something. And, you know, coming then back to the business point that you mentioned, where, you know, you talk about yourself, that you're the face of a business and it could all come crumbling down. It's a really scary realization, isn't it? And I think there are ways of mitigating that, and there are ways of building a business so that it isn't so reliant on an individual. However, the reality, as I've seen through some of my experiences, certainly over the pandemic as well, where I semi-retired and I took my eye off the ball, actually we're all needed in some capacity, but it's just what that capacity is. How I manage it now is I try to be mindful by listening to my body. I'm not great at it. So I'll be honest, Chris, I fainted and knocked myself out, when was it? Not Friday just gone, but Friday before. And that was down to me not taking my medication, so I have to supplement with vitamin B12. I'd let myself just tick along, because sometimes we delude ourselves. You've mentioned at 17 stone and you look okay for it. My limit was about 16 and a half stone, where I looked okay for it. Ended up hitting just shy of 19 stone. Now, when I was 16 and a half stone, I used to excuse my overeating as bulking. I was always really fortunate that I had arms bigger than most people's necks. And I could carry it off really well. I actually had it exposed. As soon as I crept past 16 and a half stone, it just started going completely to my gut. The reality is that underneath it, whether 16 and a half stone or nudging 19 stone, underneath all of that was actually an unhealthy person.
I mean, you sound, look, and you act very vibrant today. So how was you able to operate at the high levels that you need to give everything in your life the attentions that it requires? Were you able to do that at 16 to 19?
Ooh.
Or is this giving you a whole
Good
new...
question. Good question. So I believe I was, with hindsight. However, when I look back, I would say the reasons that I get fatigued now are very different to the reasons then. So back then, you know what it's like when carrying a bit of extra timber, although I can't notice it at all. But you know, your body starts telling you that something's not quite right. For me, what I found is actually the last couple of years, particularly with health diagnoses and so on, the burnout that I suffer, perhaps I'm more attuned to it and actually look for it rather than let it hit me. Perhaps it's just a case of getting older. I don't know. But it's a different kind of burnout now. Whereas before, it would just be 120 miles an hour, you know, foot down to the floor and then crash. Now it's almost a preemptive. My body's telling me that I'm on red battery rather than green.
How do you relax?
How do I relax? Really good question. And it is dreadful. So please don't share this bit, although I'm sure you're going to. Scrolling Instagram Reels, scrolling TikToks, like most people, I'm on that addiction to dopamine. I also play chess.
Yep.
So I've actually developed quite a passion for chess, actually. I'm ADHD, have been ADHD for quite a few years. I'm now medicated. And it's a great way of closing off the outside world. And I like to think developing my strategic thinking as well. And other than that, watching Southend United, which isn't relaxing at all. However, it's actually the bits before and after football. It's the conversations with old friends. It's seeing family members. It's seeing, you know, my old boss sits a couple of seats behind me.
Yeah.
All of those kind of things. It helps to not only give me a little bit of time out from being always on, but also it gives me that mindfulness where I just don't worry what's going on in the outside world. As a football fan, you might empathise with it, but when you're in a ground watching live sport, nothing else matters. You know, you don't even imagine that there's a world outside of that stadium.
I would like to say I can identify, but the way that Preston have played like this year, like I'm.
Oh, come on! Don't give me that.
You're not. Get me out of here.
You're not in the National League.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, and I picked it up out of the book actually. It's like, what do you believe are the dangers of a business owner staying in? You know, going from technician to worker, but staying there, you know, working in that business and not on it. What are the problems with that?
Oh, it's huge. So to borrow a quote from Michael E. Gerber, you go from working for a jerk to working for a maniac. But actually, I think it's worse than that. And I don't want to comment too much on political trends, but we know that the self-employed business owners have been squeezed recently, and it looks like a direction of travel. It's actually removed any financial incentive on a like-for-like basis to do your own thing. The reality, if you're employed, is that actually there's someone else there to pick up the mess, to sweep up after you, and to allow you to have that paid holiday, to have that sickness, etc., etc. As a self-employed person, if you get run over, then your business is gone. And you might have 5 customers, 10 customers, 20 customers, but actually you're relying on one income source, and that's it. If you go on holiday, your income streams could stop.
It's a well-paid job. And yeah.
But it is going from working for a jerk to working for a maniac. The best bit about being self-employed is choosing which 18 hours per day you work.
What are some practical tips that people could be doing right now to get out of that worker mindset and perhaps start to work on that business a little bit more?
Okay, so before going into that, I think we need to just be mindful that not everybody wants to scale it. So there are some advantages of not working for that jerk. Some people just want to be in control of their own time, and their aspiration of running a business is actually taking Friday afternoons off to play golf or doing the school runs or so on. So I think it's dangerous to presume that everybody wants to scale it and have team members and so on.
Well, can I jump in for a second then? Because it's you make a really good point. I'm maybe not even talking about the guy who wants to scale, because I'm sort of that guy. You know, I don't know whether I want to go to the next level, and that might be like really small thinking people think. But you know what I what I value more than anything is peace of mind. Is like, I want to be able to, at around 5 o'clock, try and shut off from work.
Yes.
I want to be at home present with my kids. You know, it scares me, if I'm honest with you. Like, because people have said to me, why don't you just turn this up now, Chris? Like, you have a formula that works. And I'm asking this question for me, Carl.
Okay.
It frightens the life out of me. But I'm also aware that, again, I'm not as bad as I was. I'm better at this. You know, I have a better team around. I've always had a good team.
Sure.
I just let them get on with it a little bit more. So what advice can you give to me, who doesn't know whether they want to try and blow the roof off? We're quite happy going where we're going.
Yes.
But I'm worried that I am involved in too much of my business, you know.
Of course. So the first thing we need to bear in mind is that sometimes skinny businesses are beautiful. So I know with my own business that profitability was higher at about 1 million turnover and 2 million turnover. And you've probably seen that a number of times with distressed companies, because actually the treadmill just goes faster and faster, and you've got to reinvest, there's stepped costs, all of those kind of things, which can become a perfect storm. So if you're in a position where you're debating, actually, should I go for this? Is it worth doing? I think that there's a couple of things that you need to consider. So the first one is it truly what you want? You know, what impact are you looking to make through your business? What difference are you trying to make? What is the key metric of success? Now, for some people, that's profitability. For some people, that's lifestyle. For some people, that's legacy. For some people, it's actually the end product of what they do. So it might be that you just take the E-Myth example, that you bake cakes and you want to make the very best cakes in the world. And you want everybody who eats your cakes to have this big smile on their face that they've been delighted they've never had something so amazing. So I think, first of all, identifying what that outcome is that you're looking for. And if that outcome correlates with scaling the business, then there might be hope for it. If that outcome is scaling the business, because some people, it's about ego. You know, if they don't want one shop, they want 20 shops, then it's naturally the same pathway. But then for other people, if it's all about, actually, I want the laptop lifestyle, working on a beach, blah, 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 then maybe that doesn't quite work. So that's the first thing, is to have that appraisal. I think the second thing is actually making sure that you have a clearly defined plan, what it is that you need to do to test and measure, so on and so forth, that you've got a dream that's compelling enough to be able to do it, and that you actually take action and then review it. So you might remember those 4 steps from Boss It. So within the book, I talk about dream, plan, do, review. The problem that many people have is that they have a very fuzzy dream that's not defined. The plan is possibly at best designed to raise funding. You know, it's either sent to the bank manager, or it's because they've been told to do it, or they feel they need to actually do a business plan. But it's not a tactical plan of, right, I'm going to do this by this date, and then I'm going to do this. It's just very fuzzy, SWOT analysis and all of that kind of stuff, rather than actually step by step, what do I need to do to be able to do this? And then the action. We all sit there aggressively waiting for our phones to ring these days, don't we? We don't actually go out there, wear out the shoe leather, and try to generate new business. So it's quite an uncomfortable process, because for somebody like yourself, Chris, and I'm sure it'll be easy for you because you seem to be great at what you do, but for somebody who's in your position, many people kind of hope that life will get easier when they start scaling. But actually, you've got 2 jobs at once. You've got to carry on your existing job, and you need to grow the business beyond what you've been doing so far. So your business development efforts need to ramp up. You need to start thinking about systems and processes and so on. And you might have some of them, but actually, if you're going to scale, do you need more of them? How does that need to look as an organization to take you from, 5 people to 15 people to 50 people to 500 people? You need to think about the capital requirements. All of those kinds of things actually are a full-time job by themselves. So when we then cast ourselves back to why we start on this journey of self-employment, which is to get away from that jerk, to stop working for somebody else, actually, we're not getting Friday afternoons off. We're even more all consumed by this business. There's even less money available because actually we've got all of these stepped costs and we've got to find money for wages and so on. And it's a tricky journey to be on.
In your business career, has there ever been a time where it's very close to going, to hell in a handbasket? Have you ever had that time thinking like, oh shit?
Yeah, so look, that's a really good question, and I'll answer it openly and vulnerably. So, yes, there's been times where it's been challenging. We've had a number of external events in the business where it's the curveball, and regardless of how successful a business might look on the outside, you get these events and you think, right, wow, how do I get through this? We've had times where we haven't known how we're going to pay for wages at the end of the month. And, it got sorted very last minute. And I know that a lot of people kind of share these stories as a way of building out their hero's journey or whatever. That's a load of nonsense. It's a horrible place to be in. But outside events happen. Take COVID, for example. When COVID hit, at that time, we were getting a significant amount of money coming in over and above monthly payments, which would come in by check or direct bank transfer. I think the week after lockdown, we could have shaved 2 zeros off the amount that came in. And, it was oh my God, because nobody was paying bills. If you didn't have to pay it and it wasn't already on a direct debit, nobody was paying money out. So that would be just one example of many where you can have these unexpected curveballs that happen and you have to work out, right, how do we get through it? So, yes, we've had that.
And I think it's really good for people to see someone like you talking about that, because like even really good businesses can have cash flow difficulties.
100%. And it can sometimes be through naivety or lack of financial management. It can sometimes be due to external circumstances. It can sometimes be down to bad hires or bad decisions. And sometimes it can just be death by 1,000 paper cuts as well, where things are looking good and the bank statement's looking good and the numbers are looking positive. However, you perhaps then take your eye off the ball insofar as budgeting and forecasting and looking forwards, and then you're happy to turn a blind eye to certain costs being leaked out of the business left, right, and centre. Again, I'm sure you've seen this thousands of times, and then all of a sudden you're at the point where actually many households have come to this point as well, where they need to look at their subscriptions and they realise they're paying for Netflix and Disney and all of their TV channels, and wow, that's more than I was ever paying on Sky. So it's something that can happen to businesses too. And as the business grows and on the face of it becomes more successful, because we tend to correlate the biggest number in the business, i.e. the revenue, as success, as it gets bigger, the opportunities for those paper cuts just grow.
What are the main reasons that you see businesses failing today?
Okay, so I can share so many of them. I want to condense this answer down to the main ones because that's what you've asked. I feel that one of the big challenges is, and it depends on the type of business, but it's where the founder looks at what they would want the business to deliver rather than what the market wants it to deliver. So whether that's an outdated way of doing business, whether that's something that just hasn't got an addressable market, so it's perhaps too niche or whatever, where there's that disconnect between what people are willing to pay money for and what's being delivered, I think that I'm seeing that more and more. I think alongside that is a general stubbornness amongst some business owners to embrace the way the world is going. So we all know about the subscription revolution and the way that the wider economy is changing. But also then, if we look at AI, for example, how long will a logo designer be able to be in business? There'll be some who can carry on. But those who are perhaps in the middle market, where they're not quite selling it on Fiverr, but they're also not selling it for £10,000, let's say they're selling it for £500, £1,000, what differentiator have they got versus generative AI that can create imagery and not only create it and make it look really professional, but provide insight based on psychological factors and so on? AI is horrifically scary for a lot of us. And I know certainly for myself, I imagine that the first industries that would be hit by AI would be those that are very algorithmic focused. So like the worlds that you and I are in finance, it's facts and figures and data. However, the fact that we had this AI explosion with ChatGPT and Midjourney, and there's a couple of others within a couple of weeks, I think it's about 2 years ago, 2-3 years ago, there's this explosion. And the thing that was most staggering for me wasn't the social media posts that you were seeing with the caricatures of people. It was actually the fact that the thing that broke through was creativity. Because I'd always imagined that that would be the very last thing that artificial intelligence will be able to tackle. So, as I mentioned, first one would be the disconnect between product and market. Second one would be the disconnect between what the business does and has always done and the reality of the world today. There are other areas of failure, of course. I think cash flow management is absolutely critical. We all know the sayings about actually we need to be focusing not so much on turnover, but property is sanity, cash is king, all of those kinds of things. But I guess for me, the lack of prioritization of cash flow management and the fear that many business owners have of upsetting customers who perhaps don't pay. The reality is, if your customer don't pay, they're not a customer and you're a charity. But there are still business owners that refuse to put in formal processes and actually have those very tough conversations because they believe that customer is big. And then I would say the final one is a lack of oversight of the business from a helicopter view. So that's either a complete lack of oversight and not even paying attention to any of the numbers, or a focus on all of the detail and a failure to sort the wheat from the chaff and actually find the KPIs that really need focusing on.
Okay. So for many, many years, I've supported business owners of different sizes with insolvency and turnaround issues. And the lack of financial understanding of some of these businesses is incredible. So you mentioned about KPIs there. What is the basics, the basic finance function that every business should have in?
Okay.
And how regularly should they be reviewed?
Okay, so I don't think it's just finances. I actually think it goes beyond finances. And the reason for that is, as we know, KPIs are a lagging indicator. Finances are a lagging indicator. So if you've got financial problems today, that means you had a problem yesterday, but that problem wasn't identified. So I would first of all talk about this from OKRs and KPIs. So for those who don't know, KPI, key performance indicator, the results that you should be looking out for. The OKR is actually the actions. So OKR stands for objective and key results, the actions that you should be monitoring that ensure the success or otherwise of your KPIs.
What, like leads, presentation, sales?
Even beyond
customer?
that. So it's very much leading versus lagging.
Okay.
So as a good example, a KPI would be a lead generated. An OKR would be dropping off 10,000 leaflets. Okay, so the activity that generates the result.
Okay.
Now, the problem that a lot of business owners have is that they focus on the KPIs that monitor the results, but they don't actually monitor the stuff that happens before to generate those results. And business is fairly predictable. So it's very similar to what you would call a resource management computer game. So something like Civilization or The Sims or all of these sorts of things where, SimCity, for example. I don't know if you remember playing SimCity. You wasn't a geek like me. Okay. So as a geek, I played SimCity and it was a very basic resource management, but you had a bit of cash and you had to balance up how many commercial buildings, industrial buildings and residential buildings that you set up. And the KPI on that would be the end result of, is the population going up or down? How much you're getting in through tax? Are you going to be skint soon? But actually the OKRs are about the management of it beforehand, the management of those resources to see whether it's going to work or not. So business owners need to first of all identify what the KPIs are, what results they want to track, and I'll come to some specifics in a moment. But they then need to work it back to the OKRs. What actions do they need to take? What ratios would they expect to be in place to make sure that they're actually doing what they need to do to continue to deliver those results? Because if you're waiting, heaven forbid, if you're waiting 18 months for your accountant to produce the year-end accounts by the deadline, the reality is that you're getting old news. You're not getting today's newspaper.
Not useful, is it?
You can slightly improve that. I mean, you asked about what businesses should do. You could slightly improve that by quarterly or monthly management accounts. However, you're still looking at historic data. And then if you haven't been managing the activity that drives that data, actually you then need to reconstruct time and time again why it failed. And there's always convenient excuses, isn't there? That we can always blame something else or somebody else or the outside world. So going back to your core question, what data points should be managed by a business? I like to play it really simple. So I have a rule of three. And certainly for my businesses, I look at the three biggest numbers. So that's turnover, that's gross profit, so what's our margin, and I look at the profitability, so the net profit. Now, from those, you can very easily identify what your overheads are. And if something is out of kilter of where we'd expect it to be, that's when we can then do a deeper dive. And again, I always focus on the biggest numbers first. Mm-hmm. The reality, certainly for professional services businesses, and in fact for the majority of businesses, is that you can actually dramatically improve the bottom line by making what seems like incremental changes on the top line. So, it's this magic of business maths that, a business hypothetically could increase their prices by 10%, provided they don't lose 10% of value of their customers. Actually, that drops down, and the compounding impact, because it's all profit, it could increase their profitability by 50%, for example. All very hypothetical. But if you're not monitoring that stuff regularly, how do you know that needs to be done? So that's the first thing. I'd be looking at those KPIs. So looking at the biggest KPIs that would have the most dramatic impact. I think it needs to be rounded off. And, finances, whilst important, and we call them the language of business, we need to look at the other KPIs that determine success as well. So we need to be looking at NPS scores, both for customers and employees. We need to be looking at, depending on industry, a restaurant might be looking at average covers.
NPS?
Net Promoter Score. So effectively, staff happiness, client happiness. Mm-hmm. Restaurants might be looking at the number of covers per evening. Retail might be looking at square footage utilisation. There's all kinds of metrics that you might want to manage, but it goes beyond the strictly financial. But the important thing, I believe, is then to track back from the KPIs that you set in each area. So you'd have sales KPIs, you'd have marketing KPIs, finance KPIs, etc., then track back to the activities that drive the success or otherwise of those. So to identify what the ratios are that you need to, first of all, identify what the performance should be, but then also understand what a benchmark for it is. And then the activity levels that once you've worked all of this out, how much do you need to feed into that with the ratios you've got to get the KPIs? So going back to, I guess, grassroots with this, if we were to be looking at a sales process, for example, we would have the conversion rate of the salesperson. Most people would probably intuitively understand that that's one of the ratios that needs to be managed. But then you need to track that lead journey right the way back to the point where they don't even know you as a business, mm-hmm. and then look at the conversion across the way. So if you're heavily invested into email marketing, you could have open rates on emails. You could then have click-throughs and then click-throughs on your websites and so on. Now, the beauty of, I guess, the world we live in today is that we can lay our hands on industry standard conversion rates and ratios for certain areas. So that's a good yardstick to measure from. So it's, if we were to go onto any email marketing software's website, they will probably have case studies and surveys of their customers and what's achieved, because they'll want to sell how great they are. That's a good first stab in the dark. NPS, same again. We can look online and we can see average NPS by sector, and it gives us a way of understanding a baseline of what we should be aiming for. Once we've got that, we can then work back to, right, how many emails do we need to send to get the required numbers of opens, to then get the required numbers of clicks, etc., etc. And then, Chris, the management is dead simple, because you're going to see a failure somewhere in the process. It might be all across the process, or it might be that your titles of your emails are dreadful or they're all going into spam. You know, it might be just one metric that's totally out of kilter. But as a business owner, it gives you the understanding of exactly what bit you need to focus on.
Lot of info there.
Yes.
Really, really
I've
helpful.
just info dumped, haven't
Yeah,
I?
really helpful.
Where do I send my invoice for?
Yeah, well, my head just goes, that's a lot of work. So is that something you over the years, I've got better at this. Like literally, I'm embarrassed about it now sometimes. But the way I used to look at it is I go, well, costs are about there. We're doing about there.
It's okay.
We're sound.
Yes.
Yeah, we're sound. Yeah, like literally, that is how I used to do things.
And that's all well and good when things are going well.
Yes.
But the risk is that external curveball or that death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Well, I got into. It was you might know him. Do you know John Holliday Pocknells? He's your neck of the woods.
No, I don't. No.
So yeah, he's an accountant, and he really helped me. And another chap called Will Polston. We just,
I know Will. I know Will.
Yeah, nice guy. And we just went through things, and it really, I got sharper on numbers. And the one thing it really helped me with is I wasn't as worried, like, because I'm that guy that I think it's all going to fall apart.
Of course.
Like, literally, I say it a lot about that imposter syndrome. It's like, oh my God, yeah, everyone's going to find out. No one's ever going to want to work with me again. Yeah. And I've been like that all my life, And when I started to get a real grip on the numbers, I thought, I've done great here. And I started to implement it, and I would check management accounts every month. And then you've just said that, and I've gone, fucking hell.
Yeah, so that's the difference between a management accountant and, this is how I define it anyway.
Yours made sense, really made sense. It was another level.
So for me, that's the difference between a management accountant and a virtual CFO, FD, however you want to phrase it, I believe. Because the problem with, without wanting to be disparaging to a number of accountants, because they all do fantastic jobs, but they do what they're engaged to do. And a management accountant can sometimes fall into the trap of just printing the profit and loss and balance sheet off of the computerized system. And the numbers, the data is actually the extent of the advice rather than a platform for the advice. So for me, I guess it's one of the things we do, but I guess the real power and where financial input can really benefit a business is actually going beyond those numbers and looking at the drivers. What are the drivers of each individual key KPI, and actually pulling in processes, systems, and accountability to make sure that they're hit. Now, some businesses might inadvertently be working really well. So they might be doing this stuff without even realizing, or performing really well without even realizing. But again, what we said is what gets measured gets managed, and it's about identifying where those, I guess, key pivotal parts for any business are that actually need to be focused on, optimized, and also it shows where the opportunities are as well, where you can turn the dial ever so slightly and make one of those incremental changes that actually has a massive impact on cash or profitability.
So, thankfully, if someone's watching or listening to this like me, who's just gone, oh dear, I love the sound of that, but I just don't believe I've got the capabilities to pull something like that together, you can hire that in, can't you?
Absolutely. And, people like us, and there are other firms that do it, you can absolutely hire it in on a fractional basis, because I think the challenge that a lot of small businesses have is that they either outsource everything but try to focus on cost as opposed to outcome from this process. So it's about
a cost and not an investment.
Exactly. So it's about keeping themselves out of prison. It's about making sure the taxman's paid. It's about making sure that no returns are late and that the accounts are accurate. That's the bread and butter. That's the stuff that should be done regardless of provider. So there's either that, or they get to perhaps the next level where they want to employ somebody in-house. But that person who's employed in-house is in an uncomfortable no man's land. And what I mean by that is that they're probably massively overqualified for some of the stuff they're doing, but massively underqualified for the other stuff they're doing. And I see it all the time, Chris, where you have somebody who's maybe paid 40, 50 grand a year as a finance controller, finance director, whatever job title they're given. But on one day, they're doing bookkeeping that could be outsourced at a very low rate. On the next day, they're making decisions that actually are very high level and probably beyond their experience and remit. So that's where a lot of businesses find that a fractional solution, which might be different team members doing different bits, can actually work out quite cost effective as well.
Well, can we come on to that? And I know it's very much, how long's a piece of string? Because a lot of directors that I deal with and have dealt with over the years, that they just don't understand that if you have the right finance function, that will drive all the decisions in the business. And either you will never, ever speak to somebody like me, or you will see it that far ahead. You've got more options. But it's the but I want to save money. So what would be, and I know this is a hard thing to answer, but what would be a starting point to hiring a fractional FD?
Okay, so starting point insofar as cost?
Yeah, cost.
Okay, so really good question, and there are a number of variables. So ultimately, professional services, regardless of how they present themselves, they generally come back to how much time and how much expertise, how much cost is this going to take for us to deliver. So there are factors. If it's a whole finance function, everything from bookkeeping, how many transactions are there and so on, through to how many touch points, etc. How many board meetings, is it weekly, is it monthly, is it 3-monthly? And let's be honest, what value is it going to drive the business owner? Clearly a business where there's huge benefit to be had from this, it could be deemed to be more valuable to have that service than one where actually it's just maintenance and you are effectively a commodity delivering it. To come to a more practical answer, because I know that's what you're after here, practically for a business, I would say that at a bare minimum, you're probably looking at £500 a month, absolute bare minimum.
Okay.
But for that bare minimum, what you're getting is the scene being set, the high level advice, but very little implementation and so on. It's kind of here it is for your business. Now it's down to you to run with this and manage it. Obviously, if the business is perhaps lacking in accountability, for example, and they need somebody who's more present to really challenge the board members and highlight the issues, if perhaps the business owners aren't necessarily so savvy with data and need somebody to translate it, because let's be honest, professional services advisors, generally, we're actually translators. That's kind of what we do. We translate complicated stuff into plain English, whether we're lawyers explaining legislation, accountants explaining finance, etc. We are translating from something very complex to something very simple. If they need that support, then it can go up from there. The variables that impact it primarily until you get to the implementation element, which is where it can ramp up to the cost of a full-time employee, the factors that impact it is the frequency and the involvement with the directors.
Okay, cool. Appreciate you answering that. I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to sort of just...
I've rabbited on, haven't I?
You have been fantastic.
Bless you.
I'm just going to... I have a few more
I'll
questions.
slip you 20 quid later.
Yeah, I do have a few more questions. I've not got you off the hook just yet. Why do you think that directors bury their head in the sands when it comes to finances?
Okay, it's emotionally charged, and I think a lot of directors don't want to admit what they don't know. I think that it's shocking actually that finance is the language of business. However, not many people train as accountants, not many people have that financial understanding. But I think all business owners believe that they need to be seen to have it. So I think that's the first thing. Secondly, I mean, coming back to the emotions, it's all consuming. If it's your baby, business is your baby. Nobody likes to admit to themselves they've got an ugly baby. And, the finances giving you that story tells you you've got an ugly baby.
Yeah.
So there's that side of things to overcome. And there's the ego at the gym and amongst your friends and so on who might have seen you as being very successful. So that's the second side of the emotional side of things. Thirdly is the fear around bankruptcy or, oh my God, am I going to go to prison if I don't pay this tax bill? All of that kind of stuff. And I think entrepreneurs, sadly, And I say sadly, I suffer from it. I imagine you suffer from it. I imagine most do have this deluded optimism that actually things are going to be okay and we're going to push through it. Because if we couldn't see that bigger vision tomorrow, why would we do it in the first place? So I think that comes into play as well. I think there's also not knowing where to turn. You know, having that headache, knowing something's wrong, not knowing exactly what's wrong because you're not financially trained, you don't really understand it, and it all becomes very overwhelming. But it's a phenomenon, it happens all the time.
I think you touched on a really interesting point there. I mean, I've been an avid reader of personal development over the years, but you know what? When the shit's hitting the fan, actually, I don't know how helpful that is.
100%.
You've got to look at things as they are, not worse than they are, not better than they are.
We can visualise the lottery win as much as we want. It doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Yeah. I think it's Tony Robbins, isn't it? He says if you can go outside and say, I've got no weeds, I've got no weeds. But if you don't get up off your arse and pull the weeds out.
100%. And you know what? That applies throughout the business journey. If it's somebody just starting a business, you can talk yourself into having the most amazing business. You can ask family and friends, but until they give you 10 quid for your product or service, you haven't got a customer.
Yeah. So, and I think that's it. It's like, and again, it all comes down to, well, how do you know how bad it is or how good it is? And it's having that finance function and
absolutely. And look, if you were training for a marathon and you were taking it really, really, really seriously, and you wanted to do it in, I don't know, what's a good time for a marathon? I think it's under 4 hours. I might have embarrassed myself massively, but
I've no idea.
Whatever the benchmark
I'd be happy with under 4 hours.
I'd be happy with 40.
Yeah.
But whatever that benchmark is, if you were really serious and you wanted to be in the top 10, 20% in the country of marathon runners, you'd be tracking obsessively, not just on the day, not just the results, but you'd be tracking your training. You'd have a training plan, you'd have a nutrition plan, you would be monitoring all of the metrics to see if you're on the right path to achieve what you want to. Business owners don't tend to do that.
What is next for Carl Reader?
Really good question. I wish I knew. So, the book Boss It, which you kindly mentioned earlier, was a letter to my children.
Just so everyone can see it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was a letter to my children. I believed that the education system didn't prepare us for the world of business. And in fact, for me, I left school at 15. It was because I was utterly disengaged. I was fortunate enough to have a grammar school education, but I was disengaged. And business ownership wasn't a consideration when it comes to careers advice and the syllabus and so on. Now, schools are moving in the right direction. I'm a trustee of Young Enterprise, which is also trying to help move it into the right direction. But actually, my passion is about helping people understand that whilst they might not be cut out for academia, I couldn't do A-levels or university. I'm sure I could cram and get the results if I wanted to. I was quite fortunate with exams. I could always get through by the skin of my teeth. But the reality is I would find the process totally mind-numbing and I would totally disengage from it. There's a different path. So for me, part of what's in the future, and I don't know how it permeates because, for me, every day is a new opportunity and we see what's out there. But I would like to spread the message that it is okay to run your own business. It's a perfectly legitimate choice. But also, and here's the thing, Instagram, TikTok and so on are showing us that it's all about private jets and champagne and so on. And it ain't. It's really boring. It's not about making £2 million off Bitcoin overnight, because those of us who've tried messing around with crypto, and I know mine was far less, and probably most people's are, probably realise that actually you haven't got a clue what you're doing and you lose most of your money. Actually, business is really boring. It's simple, but it's boring and it's hard work. It's doing the same repeatable stuff over and over again. It's buying something for a £5, selling it for a £10 consistently.
Where can people find out more about you?
Oh, good question. So I'm sure there are loads of places they can find stuff out about me, but the best place is social media. So at Carl Reader, I'm reasonably active on socials. I try not to inundate socials with business stuff too much, but I'm there.
Carl, it's been an absolute pleasure.
No, likewise, Chris. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Top man. God bless you, mate.